Senator Rand Paul is with us. Senator, welcome back to the program. Good to see you, sir.
Glad to be with you, Sean.
A lot of response tonight to the president saying the following, that ISIL is not, of course, this is the Islamic State, Islamic. Let me play the cut for you.
ISIL is not Islamic. No religion condones the killing of innocents, and the vast majority of ISIL's victims have been Muslim. And ISIL is certainly not a state. It was formerly al-Qaeda's affiliate in Iraq and has taken advantage of sectarian strife and Syria's civil war to gain territory on both sides of the Iraq-Syrian border. It is recognized by no government, nor by the people it subjugates. ISIL is a terrorist organization, pure and simple.
Senator, are we back to Fort Hood's workplace violence? Are we back to man-caused disasters and overseas contingency operations? Do you agree with that statement?
Well, I think there was one important point that he was making about them not being Islamic or a form of true Islam. Ultimately, civilized Islam will have to step up. We need to do everything we can to protect ourselves. I'm all in for saying we have to combat ISIS, but also the ultimate war, the long war. Whoever knows how long, ultimately is going to need allies from civilized Islam. So I think it is important, not only for the American public, but for the world and for the Islamic world to point out that this is not a true form of Islam. This is an aberrant form that should not represent most of the civilized Islamic world.
But there's a pattern here, and that is the official position of our government right now is that what happened at Fort Hood was workplace violence. Granted, they're not a state, but they do want to establish a caliphate. I got the sense, listening to the president tonight, that maybe he doesn't understand what the ultimate goal of a caliphate is.
I don't know that he was trying to diminish their importance. I would say that he was trying to make the point to the Islamic world that this isn't a true or accurate depiction of Islam, because ultimately we do need, and most of the allies around that also are offended and also are worried about the rise of ISIS are also Muslim nations. And I think they will rise up, and ultimately the ultimate victory, there are going to be short-term victories in the war on terror and the war on radical Islam, but the long-term victory is going to require allies who are part of the civilized Islamic world, which is the majority of the Islamic world, but they have to step up because, frankly, they've been allowing too much of this to go on. And, frankly, countries like Saudi Arabia, I think, have aided and abetted the rise of ISIS.
The president proclaimed tonight that America is safer, and then he used the success quote in Yemen and Somalia as examples. I don't think they'd be two examples that I would point to of great success, in my humble opinion. Do you believe America's safer? Do you think what's happening in Yemen and Somalia are examples of a policy that's working that he's going to employ here?
No, absolutely not. Libya is a disaster. Libya is a jihadist wonderland. The jihadists are swimming in the embassy swimming pool in Libya. Syria is a disaster. It's chaotic. Iraq is a disaster, and Iraq is chaotic. But the one thing we need to remember about all of this, while I do support doing whatever it takes to take out ISIS, we need to remember how we got here. And the reason we got here is because we took it upon ourselves to topple secular dictators who were the enemy of radical Islam. Assad, as bad as Assad is, he is an enemy of ISIS. He is an enemy of radical Islam. As bad as Gaddafi was an opponent of radical Islam. As
Senator,
bad as
I might take issue
was.
with you, because what you're saying is that we created this. I would argue that the war in Iraq was won, that the surge was effective, that we had an emerging democracy, albeit an imperfect one, and that the only thing that we needed to do was keep training forces and intelligence forces on the ground, which the president's now doing, which would have prevented all these cities that Americans fought, died, and bled for from being taken over by ISIS. I believe the vacuum was created by President Obama's policy.
I think you have a good point, and I don't disagree with it. The only thing I would say is that we didn't create the conflict. The conflict's been going on for 1,000 years. The conflict is between a bizarre, barbaric form of Islam versus the rest of Islam. It's Sunni versus Shiite. It's a long, ongoing war. We didn't create it, but we did allow a festering of chaos when we toppled the secular dictators. There have been 4 secular dictators that have gone: Gaddafi, Mubarak, Assad maybe, and Hussein. Every time the secular dictator has failed, chaos has arisen and radical Islam has become dominant. Radical Islam is our enemy in all of those countries, so we need to understand how we got here in order to figure out how to fix it.
I think you were right. I think we do need to understand how we got here. But if you agree with me that we won the war, a democracy was emerging, and that our role was, President bragged tonight about taking home those 140,000 troops. If we had kept intelligence forces on the ground, which he is now going to send back, if we kept training forces on the ground, counterterrorism measures on the ground, I would argue that ISIS would not have had the opportunity to take all the cities that so many Americans fought and died for. And that, to me, is if a war's won, you've got to, keep the victory. As a matter of fact, let me go to President Bush's comments, because I think President Bush was 1,000% correct in his prediction about what would happen if we pulled out too soon. Here's what he said.
Begin withdrawing before our commanders tell us we are ready would be dangerous for Iraq, for the region, and for the United States. It would mean surrendering the future of Iraq to al-Qaeda. It would mean that we'd be risking mass killings on a horrific scale. It would mean we allow the terrorists to establish a safe haven in Iraq to replace the one they lost in Afghanistan. It would mean increasing the probability that American troops would have to return at some later date to confront an enemy that is even more dangerous.
Senator, could he have been any more right?
Well, I guess the question would be, we have the same situation in Libya. Are there enough troops to stabilize Libya? Are there enough troops to take over and stabilize Syria? And are there enough troops to take over and stabilize Iraq? There is an argument to be made that Iraq is not really a country, and that it's difficult to create a nation out of something that has never been a country. It was created artificially after World War I and involves warring tribes between Sunnis and Shia who've been fighting each other for 1,000 years. Yes, leaving troops might have helped stability, but it might also be that countries like Iraq and Afghanistan are not real countries, and they will devolve into tribal warfare no matter how long we stay.
Do you think the president needs congressional approval before taking any military action? I know you've been saying that in the days leading up to the speech.
Yes, absolutely. The Constitution's very clear. They debated this in the beginning. Hamilton, as well as Madison, are very explicit in the Federalist Papers. They say, we gave the war-making power to Congress because we wanted to make it difficult to go to war. Now, this is an intervention, and I don't always support intervention, but this is one I do support. But I think the president would be more powerful. The country would be more united. He should have come before a joint session of Congress, laid out his plan, as he did tonight, and then called for an up or down vote on whether or not to authorize him to go to war.
Do you believe by not going to Congress it's unconstitutional?
Yeah, it isn't the constitutional way. It doesn't in any way represent what our Constitution dictates, nor what our founding fathers intended. So it is unconstitutional what he's doing.
Senator, thank you so much. Senator Rand Paul, appreciate it.